All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our first Startup Academy event. We're just going to give the rest of the attendees who I see that are just logging in one more minute, and then we'll go ahead and get started. I think we should have Jens here as well. Can you hear me? Hi, awesome. All right. I think we should be all good to go. So, welcome everyone. It's awesome to see you here on this lovely Tuesday, and good morning to Jens to San Francisco. So today we'll be talking about sales and market strategy. So this event is a part of our first Startup Academy event that I'll be super excited to tell you a bit more about. But before we kick things off, I'll just like to share with you like 2 or 3 slides about our community for those of you who don't know Before You Shine yet. So Before You Shine started about a year and a half ago as a startup community here in Czech Republic. Our aim, our goal, our mission is to connect the founders that are just starting, that are just getting out there with the rest of the startup world, to make sure that we kind of narrow the gap between all the shiny startups, all the Forbes 30 under 30 and Fortune 500, and kind of the rest of us who are working as hard and want to make our dreams come true as much as the other founders do. So that's a little bit more about us. What we do, of course, first of all, we organize events. So we have our Startup Academy events where we talk about all the different topics and skills that you need to have as a startupper, whether you're a founder, whether you're the CMO or the head of sales or the people operations manager. We cover all different topics, and we're doing these on a monthly basis. We have a lot of exciting speakers, including the one today joining us. So I'm really, really happy to introduce that here. Another type of event that we have, which is really popular, is Startup versus Investor. This is an offline event that we host on kind of a regular basis when we can host offline events. And here we kind of uncover the stories of how a startup raised their seed round, their A series, B series, what was behind, what's the process, what was their investor point of view. So we'd always talk with the partner from the VC fund that invested, and of course the founder who got the investment. And last but not least, we do a lot of networking events. One of my most favorite ones is Founders to Founders, which is a bi-yearly gathering of all the founders in Czech Republic. On our first event, we had about, I think, 90 founders. On our second event, we had about 120 founders from all different companies around Czech Republic. So really exciting. Apart from our events, we have our Czech Startup Community group on Facebook, where there's almost 600 of us there right now. And it's kind of a private space for anyone who wants to ask any questions, who wants to get some feedback on their product or, on anything else that they're working on. We share monthly tips for events, and, we kind of are starting to build our own startup library of, different words you need to know, podcasts you should listen to, books you should read. So I definitely recommend joining us there if you haven't yet. For those of you who are new here, I would also love to tell you that we have mentors that are mentoring with us pro bono for anyone who has any questions. These are the companies the mentors are from, and they will help you with anything from, starting with sales to marketing to tech, product design, over to operations, legal, and HR or people operations. We also have a couple of investors there. So if you're looking to get funding and have a lot of questions or some questions about how the process works, we have investors in our mentor group as well, all on our website. So you can just reach out to them, and they're happy to help you. Another program that we've been working on is startup internships. So we're not only looking to help founders and startuppers to become unicorns, but we're also helping people who want to get into startups and work for startups. So we actually launched this program a couple of weeks ago. So far, we already placed a couple of interns, which I'm super excited about. So if you're looking for extra help for your startup, whether they are paid internships, not paid internships, we'll help you, guide you through the process, and and send you some interns. And lastly, I just wanted to talk about the newsletter that we send out every month. This can be a really super helpful resource if you don't really have time to look into communities, to follow a lot of Facebook groups. We really gather everything, all the content that we work on. Plus, we work with all the different initiatives, incubators, and competition creators out there. So we always send you tips on what startup competitions are out there, what are the deadlines, what can you win, and what other events are happening. And we always send a summary of our blog as well. So that's the kind of the final resource I wanted to share with you. And yeah, that's it from my side. Let's move on to the event. So we have Jens here with us today, and he'll share his experiences and his deep knowledge about the topic on sales and market strategy. To give you to do a little kind of groundkeeping before we get started. First of all, if you have any questions during the event, please feel free to ask in the chat box. I'll be monitoring it the whole time during the event, so you can ask any questions you have. Jens will kick off the session with the content that he prepared, and then we'll have kind of like a 20 to 30-minute Q&A session from all the questions we collected from you when you were registering for this event. So there is already a lot of questions we have, but if you have any other ones, please feel to share them. I'll be also sharing a couple of polls in the chat, so you can kind of vote, on your answers, and also see who's on the call today with us to understand our audience a little better as well. All right, that's it for me, Jens, and the floor is yours.
Hello there. I hope you can all see me. Great to be with you to join this Before You Shine and CheckCrunch session on sales and market strategy today. I'll have a few remarks to make here from the Silicon Valley, and then we'll hopefully get into a conversation. You can ask the questions that you want, but let me just kick it off with a quick introduction here. I'm just gonna share my my screen. Just a second so that you will be able to follow. It should be building up now.
Awesome.
Can you already see it?
Yeah, we can see your screen.
Okay. I cannot see it myself for some strange reason. But let me see what happens. Hang on. Let's see if this works now. Okay. Yeah, I cannot see my own screen, which is. So
I think you can go directly to the presentation, and you can just switch the slides there. We'll kind of see what you see.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I could probably do that. All right, here we go. So you can see this all. Quick introduction of myself. I have been here in Silicon Valley for about 20 years. I now run a small boutique consulting and advisory firm called Yabusame Partners. I have two partners, one in Paris and one in Tel Aviv. And we focus on working with early stage technology startups on topics such as strategy, go-to-market, and fundraising. And of course, we also like to leverage our very broad international network to help our startups. That's sort of the quick introduction on myself. I'm here in south of San Francisco and based in Sunnyvale, and very closely working with a lot of startups in this area, but also globally, as in Europe, in Asia, everywhere where there's interesting technology. So much about me. Obviously, we have a very broad topic today. Sales and market strategy 101 is a topic we could probably spend an entire workshop, an entire day, or several days on. So I want to make a few important remarks and also put this a little bit into perspective of the current crisis we're all facing on a global basis, and how important it is to have sort of these aspects in close view and make sure that you are positioned correctly. And then I'm happy to open this up for questions. Clara will be moderating the question session. So when you start a business, it's all about you're constructing a value chain, right? You're really trying to create value. And so the two components in this value chain I want to highlight today are number one, the business creation phase. So it's really that early stage phase where the foundational elements of your business will be decided. And then, of course, in parallel, usually you have your product development going. You're looking at your innovative technologies, whether it's hardware, software, anything that's going to be at the core of your business. And then once you have that ready to take to the market, you really need to make key decisions about your market strategy, as well as your go-to-market activities that will support that strategy. And then ultimately, as you gain more customers and customer support, customer satisfaction is really important, customer retention, and then essentially further down the road, this whole cycle repeats again as you bring in customer feedback, you improve, you change your product, you expand your product, maybe you add new products. So it's that cycle between your side and the customer, and then the feedback loop. So let me kick off with business creation. So this is all about strategy and positioning your business. You've been through this. I mean, you may know the business model canvas. You have a business idea, but you need to validate that, right? You need to make sure there is enough substance there. There's enough differentiation there. So waking up one morning and thinking, I've got to really do this or develop that type of technology is great, but it needs a lot of work to make sure it's fully vetted. It makes sense. There's a due diligence behind it. You have the right research, and then ultimately, what you hope will happen will be you crystallize your value proposition that really says, here's what I can add in value to my customers, and I'm not just I'm not just another Me Too company, but I actually have something that's differentiated, which is really important, because ultimately maybe you can compete on price for a little bit, but at some point those advantages will be gone. So it really needs to be something that's unique in a way, and that's when you're on the track to potentially making it to unicorn status. But even that, of course, has a lot more challenges along the way. And then, of course, you need to think about who's your customer. Who are the customer segments I'm serving? So not just in the micro sense, but also in the macro sense. So maybe some startups have options around how many markets they can actually serve. They can possibly work in a number of different verticals and different industries. Now, you need to figure out where is the opportunity the greatest, where do you have the fastest track to success, to customer engagement, to customer conversion. But then also within the industry, you want to take a look at, is it the medium-sized company that's going to be most likely buying my solution, or am I positioning this to large enterprises, or maybe really small companies? So there's a real element, and we refer to it usually as product market fit, and that's something that you need to keep in mind, right? Sizing the market opportunity is critical, because if you ever want to get funding, this is one of the key questions every investor will ask you. How large is your market? What's your reasonable assumption of how much of that market you can ultimately capture? If it's too small, if you're not uniquely positioned or differentiated enough, then of course from the very beginning it's going to be very hard. If it's a billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar market, it's a different story. But if it's a market that's much, much smaller, and you're new, that really raises the risk profile. So then really also very important is you want to, figure out the right business model, right? How do you make money? What are you actually selling? How do you sell? Is it a SaaS subscription model that gives you recurring revenue? Is it a one-off, perpetual license sale? Is it, there are many different options. You need to figure out the one that's most suitable to your business. So all these, this information, these assumptions need to be made. You need to really figure out what is going to make your company successful, and then of course your founding team is of absolutely key importance. Ideally, you have a founding team that's balanced. Investors like to look at teams that represent deep technology knowledge and expertise and experience, as well as the business side, right? So typically, if you have a founding team of 2 people, ideally one is really steeped in the business and the experience and maybe has launched companies before. The other one may be the technology founder. And if you need to complement those skills, especially in the early days when you cannot afford to hire people, you want to make sure you have the right advisors on board, because they will ultimately also assure investors that this business is in good hands, if you will. Right? There's enough experience represented, and then explicitly or implicitly, your company values will be decided. How you want to actually treat your company, how do you want the company to behave, how you would like to treat your employees, which will have a major impact on how you actually then are able to recruit them and retain them. So all these things, of course, come together in your business plan that then captures all this critical information and should be the basis, the foundation of your business. And of course, the business plan is not static; it will change over time. But this is your best case assumption from the get-go. I mean, a lot of the things along the way will inform your decisions and may be different from the business plan. So now let's look at launching the business. So this is your market strategy. In a way, we've already touched on some of the aspects of your market strategy in the business creation, but maybe at a higher level, at a more strategic level. At some point, you now need to take this down to the real execution level, which means you're now going out and you're trying to actually connect with potential customers, right? You need to see responses. You need to really test the market. And what's important is in the early days, you may still have a number of degrees of freedom as to, where do I actually want to play? And that's probably not a bad thing. In fact, it's a good thing, because it'll inform you around some of the potential customer feedback. So in the beginning, it's absolutely fine to be opportunistic and engage with the people that you can get to. And sometimes it's people that are close to your company, maybe somebody already, maybe it's a friend and family connection, and you try to position your solution. And maybe you will do this into a number of different directions just to test maybe which market, which type of customer, which industry is more likely to actually engage you and buy your product, because there's a greater sense of urgency maybe in one industry versus the other. And you will find that there are a number of use cases you haven't thought about that companies will come bring to you, where you thought you were convinced something else would be of the highest priority. So you will be learning a whole lot, and you need to, of course, validate these early assumptions and course correct as needed. So again, this is sort of your micro level engagement of product market fit. You will notice very clearly at some stage, which types of companies, which types of markets are more responsive to you. And as you then move forward, you will probably, the funnel will get a little bit smaller, and you will decide, maybe I need to prioritize these different opportunities a little bit. And then ultimately, I will decide, maybe I'm going to start in the retail market, or I'm going to start in fintech or in automotive, right? Because I see there's more opportunity, the market is larger, the customers want to buy, versus the cycles seem to be longer in a different market. So you will get to that decision, and then you want to conduct sort of the early stage engagement that typically POCs, proof of concept trials, if you will. But again, you need to be smart about how to do this. In my view, POCs should always be paid for. You can discuss, however, much companies are able to pay, but at the very minimum, you need to cover your own out of pocket. And I think it's actually good practice to make companies, pay good fees for POC, because, it's having skin in the game also talks to their own commitment, right? If they pay nothing for it and they'll do everything that they tell you, and there's scope creep, as we all know, it's a challenge, and it can be actually a curse, not a blessing, to have such a customer as your first customer. So you need to really deeply understand all these techniques and sales cycles. So that's kind of the market strategy. And these are just some aspects. Obviously, you can go a whole lot more deeply into these, but I just wanted to touch on them briefly. And then the next stage is really your sales and business development stage, so the go-to-market. And I added business development to sales here because, to me, these are very similar activities. One might be a bit more long-term than the other, but they're both important, and of course they both factor into the decisions you want to make right at the beginning. Right? As you focus on your markets, on your segments, on your geographies, very quickly you will come to the decision to figure out, do I want to sell directly? Do I want to sell indirectly? If you find you have opportunities in markets you don't know so well, whether it's an industry or whether it's a different geography, it might very well be a good decision to work with a partner, right? Which then basically makes it an indirect sale. And it's, of course, direct sales, hiring people to be on the road and be selling is also an expensive undertaking. Sometimes indirect sales might be the less expensive, at least starting point. You can ultimately then still decide to convert. Inside sales is basically your phone sales. Might be another option depending on the product, right? So these early decisions you make around how you want to sell very quickly then lead to those decisions that determine, do I have to hire people, or do I go out and maybe with the business development team drive some channel partnerships? Channel partnerships are not easy to create and be successful with. You need to have information, you need to have the insights, the experience of somebody who's actually done this and led these partner ecosystems, built these partner ecosystems. But if you do this correctly, they can have a major boost to your business, because all of a sudden you have a partner that's fully aligned and has many more salespeople that can go out and position your product maybe alongside theirs. And you add greater value, and there are many advantages from working with a channel partner, which is typically a larger company. So they have more resources. They can also invest in you. They might be a potential exit. So many opportunities exist there. And then, of course, you need to figure out, what's my sales model? How do I sell? How do I compensate my sales executives? How do I incent them? Ultimately, how do I support my new customers, as the back end of the sale? And pricing is important too. On pricing, just a quick note, you can never get pricing right the first time. And it is no need to do that either, because pricing is something that you will have to learn before you really ultimately solidify your pricing model. And I'm not saying that you need to constantly change your pricing, but the fact is, in the early days, your early customers will probably get a better deal just because they're early, and you're interested in securing the business, and you'll find that you didn't want to push the envelope so far in terms of getting higher pricing from them. So in the end, you figure, after a few first customers, you will decide that number one, either maybe you restructure your pricing model altogether, or at least you raise your prices and you ask different modalities in terms of payments, etc., because you now have a bit more standing, a bit more confidence to do that. So it's fine if your pricing model goes through several iterations. And then ultimately, as you figure out these early decisions, you should really think about writing a go-to-market plan that's then also designed to allow you to scale these operations, right? Because it's great if you have your first sales executive and maybe you have one biz dev guy, but the whole dynamics change when you now think you're ready to hire the next 10 guys, right? And how do they compete with each other? How do their territories get separated? I mean, all those things that have to do with scale are critical and important to consider. So I've touched now on business creation. I've touched on market strategy and on the go-to-market sales business development activities. What I want to do now is basically do sort of a bit of a step back and say, a lot of things have changed now for startups. We're all suffering from COVID-19. The startups ecosystems all over the world have been impacted. We're seeing a lot of these things here, right? So there's layoffs, hiring freezes, startups running out of money, sales are slowing down. Nobody knows whether their customers they have in their pipelines are still going to be able to engage and close deals. You really need to focus on conserving your capital, adjust your growth plans. A lot of things have changed. I mean, from one moment to the other, or within a very short few weeks. But we also find that some startups are actually booming. They are in a position these days where actually they're getting more business. The Zoom communications, right, is a good example. Everybody's now doing online sessions. So all these online providers are really doing well, and so many other people as well. So the question is, are you in a position to maybe refocus? Can you pivot? Can you essentially use your tech to do something, to pursue something that's actually going to be in higher demand now during this COVID crisis than it was before? And some companies are successfully doing it. So as we always say, there's always an opportunity in a crisis, and it really depends on where you're positioned. It could be that as a B2C company, if you're sort of on the retail side of B2C, you might be hit harder than if you're on the B2B side, and the companies that you're dealing with are still spending, are still consuming, are still buying because they need to invest in the long term. Short-term consumer purchase is something else. So it's really based on the vertical and also on your maturity, how you're doing. But fact is that certain sectors will consolidate. I do a lot of work in automotive, for example. Autonomous driving, autonomous vehicles, AV, has many startups that are positioned very similarly. For example, in the LiDAR space, which is a sensor technology, there are 50, 60 plus companies, and that space will now actually accelerate the consolidation, I'm fairly certain about. So you can be on the receiving end of this, or you can be on the paying end of this, but there are opportunities, and you have to reevaluate. And then many startups will just simply run out of money, and you can architect an acqui-hire, you get essentially acquired, and with your person and your basically your personal commitment to a company, or you have a fire sale of your company. But basically, what I wanted to do is I wanted to just lay out how all of a sudden things have changed so drastically that what needs to happen now is you really need to do a number of things. But first and foremost, you need to really reassess the original assumptions that drove your business, right? We all know now this is about adapting your position. Adapt. How do you adjust to the current situation, which is different than before? Cash is king, reduce expenses. All those things are very common sense, and it would be sort of a natural response anyways. But then when you get to a point where you say, well, how do I now pivot? How do I pivot to something that's more relevant? And how do I make sure I'm actually on the right track? So that's a really critical decision. And of course, the other recommendation I always give to people here, and we'll also see this in the venture community, that a lot of investors are now really looking at, first and foremost, protecting their portfolio companies before they take in new investments. But to the earlier point, so what you really want to do now is you want to go to your business creation elements, and we can do this here on the slide. I'll scroll back up a little bit in a minute, and figure out what are the things, what are the assumptions I should probably change. Where can I actually redirect my business to still be successful, to not run out of money, to still generate cash flow. Same goes for market strategy, right? If you're now reevaluating your customer segments, maybe some customers have entirely blown up and gone away. Others might be getting more attention now. Sales and business development, the same thing. I mean, you may have to refocus. All the people that usually travel from customer to customer and country to country are basically now grounded. Well, it's something that you can't change. Well, maybe you need to either convert them into inside salespeople, telephone-based sales, or you need to lay them off and then hire the other type of sales support you need. And you need to also right-size your resources, right? If you know your business is going to slow down, maybe you need to shrink your team as well. So basically, what you want to do is you go back to these phases in your business creation and think about what of all these points has now needs to be adapted, and where do I need to take different decisions to still sustain my business. So business creation, we mentioned a few. We just talked about market strategy, right? Maybe it's a different product market fit decision you now make because the circumstances have changed. And ultimately, maybe your pricing model might have to change. Maybe you revisit the decision between direct and indirect sales, depending on whether all of a sudden your channel partnerships might be the more important decision versus the direct resources you have, because maybe the direct resources you cannot pay, but the channel partnership is in place, and essentially it's somebody else's resources that are selling your solution. So take a good look at this and then decide how to move forward from here. So this is where I would then basically pause and turn it over to Clara again to maybe put up some of your questions.
I'm just real quick. Yeah. So again, thank you, Jens. This was really awesome. So I kind of structured the questions into different categories, and the one I would love to start with is basically starting off with your sales and market strategy. There were a lot of questions on, where to begin, what's the right approach. So the first question I would share is kind of, how to start effectively. What's kind of the really like the low hanging fruit that you can grab on, and what's kind of the first step in order to set this up correctly.
Yeah, and so if we talk about market strategy, again, I think there's really two elements. There's the general decision to say, okay, I'm going to play in this vertical or in that vertical. That's really a decision that's typically based on where do you have previous knowledge, right? Sometimes if somebody comes, starting a medical startup or a healthcare startup and has previous, history in healthcare, that might be a great fit. But if you then find that the same technology could also be used in supply chain and logistics, then, well, you have to make the decision. Either do I find somebody else who can basically represent that market knowledge in my startup, or do I just make the decision for the time being, I'm going to focus on healthcare because that's where I feel most comfortable. Maybe where I have a network that I can tap into, right? I have potential customer contacts. So it's really important to figure out that market. But then secondly, it's really about who is my customer. So we refer to this as the persona. Like what's the persona of the people I want to reach? What do they look like? What do they behave like? How do they act? And the persona may not just be an individual person, but it could be a company as a persona. Right? And that persona term, which we use in marketing, is often then viewed in conjunction with the buyer's journey. So essentially, that's kind of you define what that profile looks like, and then you figure out, well, how does that person, how does that buyer buy technology? How do they buy my product? What do I need to basically put out there in terms of information? How do I need to engage them so that I can make it comfortable for them to look at my solution and buy? And ultimately, that's how I then get to my customers. So understanding your customer or your prospect, your future customer, and the way that they would most comfortably want to find out, decide about next technology they want to buy, how they want to engage with you. In some cases, the first best engagement model might be that POC. In other industries, it might not be a POC. Maybe it's a simpler product, and the buyer's journey is shorter, and the product is not so expensive. So maybe there's less of a due diligence element, and maybe they buy faster. So that's really important for you to understand.
Right, absolutely, absolutely. So it's basically two major things, right? First of all, think about the areas you know well, where you're good, or if there are areas that you don't know that well, think about who's on your team that has that knowledge, or how you can acquire that knowledge of the market segment that you're going after. And secondly, yeah, absolutely, like you said, knowing your customers. I think that's the true goal. And I think that even companies that have been out there for 10 or 20 years are still conducting feedback loops as often as possible to understand what their customers want.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, perfect. I have another question, which is kind of again aiming on the beginning and when to really start selling and start growing as a company. When you basically, what's the right time to start building brand awareness if you just have an MVP, right? Should you invest a lot in marketing? Should you do a lot of kind of outbound sales, or should you wait and just test it on a couple of first customers? Kind of what's the best approach there?
So brand awareness, is something that of course helps you when you're more mature, when you've already established a customer base, when you have referenceable customers, right? So, but it's not something you need to really focus on at the very early days, right? In the early days, it's most important you find the right customers, that you learn enough about what it takes to sell to them so that you can replicate this, right? I mean, having 1, 2, 3 successful sales cycles is great, but understanding what you need to do to get the next 10 or 20 or 50 customers is really important. So at that stage, even if you have 50 customers, sure, people will have heard about you, and sort of your brand is certainly growing and it's maturing. But it's not something where you say, I'm going to have to do lots of marketing to, in the old sense, build my brand awareness. It's. I mean, we all know if you're in tech and in certain parts of the technology industry, companies that do well and that gain customers, they get exposure, right? Whether it's at a big show, you go to CES, or you go to some other big tech show. There are announcements, there are press releases, right, that you can use to drive your awareness. So it's important to have awareness, and it's really mostly important also for your investor relations, right? If you want to raise your next round, it's great to have these press releases on your website where you just announce that NVIDIA just acquired, or maybe they just bought some product from you, or another company bought a product from you, or they just invested. It's those types of things. It's not the typical consumer brand awareness that's so important, especially in B2B. It's more the, what's my association if I hear this company's name? And if I'm informed in this market, I would say, yeah, I know these guys just raised a successful round of money, and they have some good customer traction in these markets. And I understand that I don't know, BMW is doing a POC with them. That's the type of a brand awareness that you cannot really drive through your marketing and traditional advertising, but it's ultimately, yes, you want to build that brand for sure.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you. Let's move on to hiring in sales. And one of my favorite questions that that we had in the applications was how to turn a CTO into a salesman, right? So I would kind of make that question a bit broader, and how to basically turn anyone into a salesperson when you don't have enough money to hire maybe a larger sales team, and you really need everyone to focus on selling, especially during these times.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a challenge, and I'm not sure that there's a really good answer. I mean, some people are salespeople by nature, right? I mean, they could sell, they can explain well, they are persistent to the point where they don't give up easily, and others maybe are more introverted and they don't like to do this. And if you told them they would have to make cold calls, they would probably rather die and jump off a mountain than do that. That's a nature you can't really change. At the same time, I've come across a number of very technical people, CTOs and other roles, that are just as good in selling. They just at some point chose their favorite thing over the two things that they can do. But in joint conversations and customer pitches, they do a really good job. And then sometimes a technology person is just a technology person. They do not feel comfortable moving outside of that range. So there's really no good answer, but if you find that there's somebody who's interested in learning, then you can certainly train them. You can allow them to do things to come along. I mean, oftentimes I find, especially when you demo, right, when it's sort of a technical conversation or somewhat technical conversation, it's great to have the technical person, sometimes the CTO, in the conversation, alongside, maybe the salesperson or the development person. But if it's somebody that really doesn't want to be in sales, doesn't want to be associated in sales, doesn't even want to talk to anybody else and just code every day, forget about it, right? You can find people who can actually help you without having to hire them fully. I mean, this is part of what I do here in Silicon Valley. I sometimes work with startups, and they bring me in as a fractional executive. So I maybe dedicate 20% of my time, and I put on the hat of VP of business development or sales, and I work with them. So that way you can actually say, I don't need to pay somebody 100%. I can start small, and especially if I have no pipeline, it makes sense to start small. You don't need somebody, full time if you have zero pipeline. Things only become more engaged as your pipeline builds, and all of a sudden you actually have interactions with customers. Right? The early stage is just about lead generation. So there are models you can use that are in the market and available.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with you that it's not a good idea to turn someone against their nature into a salesperson, because it can be really intimidating. So I absolutely agree. What I saw kind of in the market, or what could be helpful if, for example, in your startup, you're kind of looking to grab some extra hands to help you sell now. I think what can be really helpful is kind of think about the process, right? So if you're sending out emails, maybe your best salesperson doesn't need to work on emails. Somebody who, is kind of more introverted could do emails or could do demos, and kind of we call it like splitting the forces, right? So thinking of which parts of the process can be automated, and then where you need the real sales phase. I think that's
and many startups here, and I'm sure it's not different in the Czech Republic, use interns, right? You bring in an intern that's hungry, that wants to know startup life, and learn, and they can basically do a lot of the work that doesn't need to have deep experience, whether it's market research, whether it's contact list creation. I mean, there's a lot of work to be done that doesn't need to be done by that high paid executive.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and actually a lot of startups hire sales interns with us, so I'm really glad you mentioned that. All right, I think we're kind of getting into the last 10 minutes of this session, so I'll try to be quick with the questions. Last question in hiring, and then we'll move into growth and some of the questions from our chat. So what do you think? Is it better on the beginning to hire more, hire fast, fire fast in your sales and kind of strategy department, or would you rather focus on the best match in the beginning?
Okay, so I mean, if you indeed have the option, which means you have to have enough money to actually hire fast and hire many, but I would always recommend to be careful with your first hires, right? Because you're investing a lot of time and potentially money in them, and you want to make sure that they're successful, right? And the first time you hire a sales executive, nobody's ever sold your product before. You don't know, how well they do, and just because they sold something else before, maybe successfully, doesn't necessarily mean they work, with your product, they work well. So I would always make sure that you get it right the first time, right? Because if you get a good first hire, if you train them and you find that they're actually capable of ultimately maybe managing a team, then they can pass on their learnings appropriately. But if you hire too many people, I just had the example of a company that got a pretty good round. They raised 22 million in January before all this started, and they went out and they hired 10 people. So they hired one sales guy already 2 months earlier, and that sales guy then turned around and hired 10 of his best friends as sales executives. And I said to the CEO, I said, you're going to regret this, right? I bet 6 months from now, not many of these folks will be left over, because if they're not producing, if they don't, and even the guy who hired them into the company didn't know enough about the product in the company. You can make a lot of mistakes. Just because you have funds at some point doesn't mean you should go out and spend it like crazy. You better go through a few sales cycles. You take your learnings. You then decide that maybe a partnership in a certain industry is better than hiring a direct sales team for that industry. So a lot of things is something you don't know these things as you set out to spend the money, and I would be more careful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first sales hire is absolutely crucial, because if you have the person who's leading the team not performing, it's very likely that this will spread out through the team. And it's kind of coming from my past experience that this has happened, and we went through, I would say, 3 different head of sales in a couple of months, and I think it's just really, like you said, you really have to be careful with the first hires. All right, cool. Let's move on through kind of a common question in the chat, and that is, what's your opinion on the freemium pricing models when it comes to your market strategy?
I mean, I think freemium is good. It really depends on what your product is and what your market is. Freemium allows people to play and to try it out, where otherwise the hurdle might be a little bit too high, the bar to climb if you charge from the get-go. And we've all experienced the freemium models in our personal consumption, and certain things we like. And I mean, oftentimes you see how really the demand falls off when you introduce pricing for something. If it's free, you use it in that limited fashion. But then when somebody basically puts up a paywall, and you're like, I'd rather not do this, right? So if of 100% of the people, right, you might in early startup stages, you might then see 15% of the people, maybe 10% paying for it and going for the paid model, and everybody else still using freemium. So it can put you into a real dilemma as well to offer that up. At the same time, I'm fairly convinced, and of course we'd have to take a look at the specific product in question, but I'm fairly convinced that giving more people the opportunity to try something out is probably a good thing, as compared to not ever having these people have the experience. So you're gaining it, but you're also then locking yourself in a little bit if people are not willing to pay the price. And maybe it's a question of pricing as well. If maybe pricing is too high.
Yeah, absolutely. I've actually heard a comment from one of our users. We have a free product now, and they said, I work with a lot of corporates, right? So he used our product with his clients, and he said, well, these kind of high-end companies, they don't want to use free products. They don't trust it if it's for free. So I think it's kind of having like both options can be smart, right? For individuals and then maybe for enterprise. That could be kind of, if you're not sure on the beginning. I think that could be helpful.
B2C is very different from B2B, right? In B2B, if you're not paying, you're taught not to expect any commitments from the other side. But of course, if it's an infrastructure play, if it's something important, you want to make sure that somebody's basically on the hook, or providing the right support for you, helping you out when you're in trouble. So in B2B, freemium is not a good idea. That's why you probably won't see many corporates right now using the free Zoom subscription or the free Zoom service that also comes out after 40 minutes. I mean, they just don't even want to deal with it, right? And of course, it's not encrypted and all these things. So it's a good point. You have to differentiate between B2C and B2B.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. So I'll grab another question from the questions we got in registrations. So let's say you already have product market fit, right? You're kind of ready to go get them. How do you scale your sales operations? Kind of what's the best approach to go, the 10x in the market?
Well, I mean, I guess the simple answer at some point is hiring, right? Let's assume you have that first good sales hire that can now drive a team. Then at some stage it becomes a bit more of a question of sales operations, right? How do we sell? How do I equip my people? How do I actually train and onboard them? Because if I hire one guy who just tags along with the first guy, that's one thing. But if you have 10 new hires or 20 new hires, you're opening locations, and so there's a whole lot more logistical and organizational things to be addressed, and then of course sales compensation, right? How do I incent people to do the right things? And there, of course, there's software for this, and to be able to manage it, and also to be able to manage my comp plan changes depending on marketplace conditions, right? I mean, right now a lot of people might want to change their comp plans just because COVID's is affecting the way people sell, and so incentives are important. So it's a lot about organizing your team, about managing it well, about creating transparency, right? If I only have one or two guys, I always know what deals are in play. If I have 20, I want to make sure I have a transparent pipeline, right? It's about maybe having a proper CRM, the CRM that not only exists, but is also getting actually updated, right? It's always the biggest challenge in CRM to get your sales to put the information in there, right? Because it just work for them, right? So there are new technologies where you can do this, voice-based and all these things. So it's the organization around that team. And of course, once you have that in place, then it doesn't matter whether you hire another 20 or another 50 people, if you have the ground support for that.
Absolutely. I read somewhere that once you start measuring your sales, they kind of naturally go 10% up just because you started measuring them, just because people actually see the amount of leads they bring in, right, and the conversion and everything. I think what can be really helpful in terms of scaling is exactly what you said. The operations side is extremely important in sales. What really helped us in the past was to actually write down a sales playbook, because I think the worst kind of salesman is the one that says, I've always done it this way. And they don't actually follow your company mission, right? They don't follow your strategy. So I think it's really, really good to have, for the leadership team to look into, a document that could actually, that should be followed, right? Not necessarily step by step, but some key major points that should be there. Great. We have another question in the chat, and I think that will be our last question today. So what about selling in a very narrow vertical, like a niche B2B market? What would be kind of your advice there?
Okay, well, I mean, obviously if it's, I hope it's not too niche, because I mean, it needs to be enough opportunity there. But of course, you will be playing in the market that you can probably oversee quite easily. Like you know who the players are, you know the competition. It's really about exposure, right? And getting to these customers and making sure that they fully understand what you have. It's about relationship building. Of course, these relationships, also need to be built in larger markets, but in a niche vertical, you have to make sure that, again, it's about branding, right? It's about differentiation. The niche market, everybody's looking at, the potential providers in the space. You want to make sure you figure out ways to differentiate yourself from the rest, right? You say, hey, I want to drive my thought leadership. Maybe it's about content creation. Maybe you write a smart blog on a weekly basis, or you write a newsletter. You get your people onto panels, right, and into shows, whether it's virtual or physical, and really try to rise above the rest, which is more easily done in a market that's relatively compact and transparent, right? So.
And then kind of become the influencers in the market, right? To really produce the content and
right, and then really very, very precisely execute on your sales engagements, on your customer satisfaction, so that that reputation grows and your brand grows.
Absolutely. Great. That was our last question. Thank you very much for everyone attending. Thank you, Jens, again, for taking the time to talk to our community. And if anyone has any questions or would like to get in contact with you, is there a channel they can do that at? We often get this question.
Yeah, absolutely. They can email me at jens@yabusamepartners.com.
I'll share your email here.
I can put it up on the slide too, if you give me just a minute here. If I go here and I go.
Yes. I shared it in
here,
the chat,
here you are.
Everyone can.
So
Awesome.
feel free to contact me. Here's the name and my email address. If you have any questions, by all means, reach out. I'm happy to engage, and it was fun talking to all of you. And all the best here from Silicon Valley.
Thank you so much again. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.